Welcome to Automates, the podcast that brings you musings from thought leaders and industry pioneers who are shaping the way we work, think, and succeed. Each episode is packed with insights, expert interviews, and practical tips that will inspire and empower you to take your business to the next level. So tune in, subscribe, and get ready to innovate with Automates. So, Cheryl, welcome to Automates, our new little podcast that we're running from here in Autologics Towers. And thank you for joining us. How are you?
I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Ben. I'm very excited.
No, it's cool. It's cool. I think when we decided to do this, we wanted to make sure that we had all of the right kind of people. And you are my right kind of people. So it's all good. All good. So I think one of the things that we always start with in these things is sort of, because obviously I know you and I've met you before, but maybe our audience doesn't. So who are you? What part of the world are you in? Because we live in this wonderful world where I can be sat here talking to people wherever they might be. And what brought you to legal?
Ooh, that's a big question, Ben. There's a lot there for me to dig into.
I know.
Yeah. No shortage of content there. So so Cheryl Wilson-Griffin, I am the CEO of LegalTech Consultants. And we're a consultancy really focused on bringing together the key elements, the big players in the legal tech ecosystem. So if you think about that, we all kind of need each other in the universe, right? The startups and the tech companies need the law firms to buy from them.
Yep.
You know, the law firms need to understand what the startups are doing, and then the investors need to be able to find the right companies that are really doing the right things. And so that's where we're really focused. I am currently in Atlanta, Georgia. That is where I call home these days. I'm from outside Chicago originally, spent about 35 or so years there. I'm on the run from winter. No more winter for Cheryl, unless it's voluntary, like maybe skiing or something like that. No winters here.
I love that. On the run from winter. I love that.
Yeah. It's not snow. It's only winter. It's like once it gets below 32 here or 0 for you all. It's this nightmare. And I'm like, why does anybody live in this temperature? This is offensive.
It's offensive. I love that. It's offensive. I just don't do it. I'm not playing this game. Not playing this game.
It's not my bag.
Yeah.
And I think you asked too, like, how did I get to legal? And it's kind of a weird story. And I think a lot of people in legal tech have weird backstories as well. Way back when I first got out of college, when I was a wee lass, I was working in marketing, actually. So I was working for Citibank and Harris Casino and some big companies at an agency. And then September 11th hit. And I was 22. I had just bought a house and I got laid off because the agency nobody was working anymore in marketing. Nobody knew what to do. And so I was, the unemployment situation in the US is pretty grim. So I was like, what else do my skills go to? And I ended up connecting with a boutique consulting firm that did graphics for legal. And so that's kind of where the whole thing started. But I just kind of fell into it, and that was 20 something years ago now.
Oh, very nice. I mean, the backstory isn't necessarily, there's lots of bad things that happened, but obviously
some grim things in it, right? Yeah.
But I think you said everyone's got a bit, well, not everyone, but there are lots of weird backstories in legal. I dropped out of university early. So I dropped out after 18 months. It wasn't for me. I ended up working in the pub game for 5 years. And then my now wife, who I saw for she was at university, I saw her for 2 hours a week, maybe, because I was doing 70-hour weeks in the pub. She said, I've got to get a proper job. So I got a proper job. And through her encouragement, I ended up working for a law firm. So yeah, I went from the pub game to the law firm to where I am now. Working for
I thought you were going to come up with a really cool transition from the pub game to the legal game, but I didn't know. I was like, ooh, what will it be? What will we call it?
It wasn't. Yeah, I don't know about cool. I mean, basically, I was forced to by my wife. That's just the way. I think that's cool. I don't know, but we'll see. We'll see.
I got to meet you, so I think it's cool because we wouldn't have met otherwise.
There we go. That sounds good. So you act as a bridge then at the moment. Your current role, current opportunities. So you're acting as a bridge and a sort of a maybe not a connector, but maybe a connector, but sort of the glue between different parties, firms, vendors, VCs, and everything else. How did you get into that? What sort of triggered the opportunity there? Was it working with one particular startup? Was it working with one particular firm? How did it come about?
Yeah, it sort of came about naturally, again tied to a grim circumstance, because apparently all my stories have a grim tie-in. But I'd spent about 12 years at three of the biggest law firms in the US
Yeah.
as a legal tech buyer and implementer and innovator. And then kind of in between there had launched two legal tech startups, one called Opus 2 and the
Okay.
second one called, Loophole. And kind of in between there, I was working at a firm during the pandemic. And, I was part of the IT department, but I wasn't necessarily doing ITE things on the regular, right? And then the COVID pandemic hit, March 13th. I can remember the date like it's the last day on earth. And it was like, everybody go home. We're never working in the office again. And so I got stuck spending a lot of time handing out laptops and teaching people how to mark up PDFs since they couldn't go walk out and give it to their secretary
Yeah.
anymore. And that got a little boring after a couple months of it. And I realized, no, this pandemic thing's real. Like, we're doing it. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to go out on my own. And so did some domain name research, got it launched. Oddly enough, literally a week later, I got contacted by one of the biggest private equity firms in Europe to work on a major acquisition. And so ended up consulting on their acquisition of that company. It was around a $300 million deal. And that's kind of where the ball got started. And I just kind of kept rolling downhill from there.
Awesome. Awesome. I mean, we love rolling down hills because downhill's easy, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
not like running uphill. I don't like running
Nope.
at all, let alone running uphill. But downhill's good.
Yeah.
Cool. That's very cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, very nice. So obviously, I think it would be sort of neglectful of me to not mention Gen AI 10 minutes into our conversation because obviously
Right.
Gen AI is everything to everyone right now. But actually, my question is really sort of the opposite. Whilst everyone is so focused on buying Gen AI tools, building Gen AI tools, using Gen AI tools, talking about it, talking to them, what are you seeing out there that isn't Gen AI? What's the stuff that's creating the interest, or is it everything is Gen AI and there's nothing else out there?
Well, I mean, definitely it's not there yet where everything's Gen AI, but I suspect everything's going to be sprinkled with it,
Yeah,
at some point in time. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on in the industry that's not Gen AI, and unfortunately, it's kind of getting washed out by some of the screaming around Gen AI.
yeah,
But I think the other thing is the things that are really cool that aren't Gen AI are maybe the less sexy things, right? Like things around collaboration, operational stuff, where you can really get rid of the things that don't bring you joy. Like there's a lot of tools out there that aren't Gen AI that are maybe they have a little AI, maybe they have a little machine learning, but it's not generative AI, so it's a
yeah,
little easier to implement. But back office things like time automation. For
yeah.
God's sake, why have we not gotten to that yet? That doesn't require. I mean, there are elements of Gen AI down the road, but
Yeah.
nobody has joy from time entries.
No, definitely not. I mean, I think, that's quite interesting actually, because there's a lot of, we spend here at Autologics, we sort of provide the technology that solves, broadly speaking, sort of three flavors of automation. It's either client facing, so it's a service that's being driven for the client. It's either practice acceleration or practice innovation. So thinking about new models of working, how can they do things differently, more effectively, increasing sort of efficiency, improving productivity. And then the third thing, which oftentimes it's not the reason we get bought, but often it's one of the reasons why our clients see more value, is that IT have got 20 projects that are always at the bottom of the list, that are operational improvements. They're things that, okay, well, we need to upgrade this, or we need to work out how we improve our reporting between these systems, and we need to do this. And so we get asked, can you do this? Can you do that? Literally 10 minutes ago, looking at my clock, 25 minutes ago, I was talking to one of our clients about their 5th use case in 12 months on our platform. And it was, yeah, we sort of want to get rid of this piece of technology that's old and crusty. And we just need something that can be the orchestration layer between our practice areas and the output. You're not doing anything sexy. You're not doing anything cool, but actually you're adding a tremendous amount of value, and your software will touch every single fee earner inside this business. And it's like, well, that isn't sexy, but it's quite interesting. Exactly. And so it's really interesting you say that there is a massive amount of opportunity in that operation space, I think. And it's not interesting in the sense that you don't tend to hear a lot of vendors sort of saying they're the back office kings, if that makes sense. It's all about the practice. I mean, maybe you could look at the likes of Big Hand and people that provide the dictation and the workflow and the coordination and the client reporting stuff. Yes, that is sort of the back office operational stuff. But I think there's not a lot of them out there, I think. So it sounds like, yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff going on.
Yeah, I think automation is king, right now. Like, even, I automate like the delivery of paper towels and toilet paper to my house. Like, if it can be automated, like, let's throw some automation at it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Why are we doing things manually?
Well, I think that's the thing. I think unless you enjoy doing it, then yeah, you should be thinking about how you can automate it. I think that's our new mantra and motto. That's what we're gonna rebrand. We're just gonna talk about.
Yeah,
exactly. But I think in that sense, so we've got this little list of questions that we were going to talk through, discussion points. But I think this one's even more important. Then, if you through the eyes of that sort of operational kind of tech that's out there, that's not selling to the practice of law as such, it is really hard being a startup. And during Gen AI and all the noise that's associated with it, how do you sort of support sort of the startups that you sort of consult with? How do you suggest that they sort of, how do they get their voice to the top? How do they elevate themselves against the big boys of legal tech? And what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really comes down to two things in my head. One, I want to drive as many inbound leads as I can, right? Because the way I look at it is, you can force the horse to water and put his head in the water and make him drink, or you can just look for thirsty horses.
Yep.
Who want your water, right? And so the idea with inbound is, those horses are thirsty, right? They've raised their hands and they've said, hey, I want to check out your product. Like, what you're talking about is cool, right? So if we're trying to get inbound leads, the second part of that is really getting the messaging right, I think. And that is incredibly hard. And if anybody just wakes up one day and writes it on the back of a napkin and thinks like they're done, no go. Yeah. Because you need different messaging for different groups, right? And you have to try them all out. It may be that one weird feature, kind of like your secondary use case you were just talking about. It's not why people buy you, but it's that thing that got you in the door in some cases, right? Yeah. And so, people say like, well, that's not our primary feature, or like, we really want to focus on this. Yes, you should know your product, know what you're trying to do. But remember, those tiny hooks can be the thing sometimes. And so I think that's really important. I think getting your message out to as many people as possible is important as well. And social makes that free now. I mean, you can run ads and stuff, but that's a race to the bottom, right? Like, you're just the idiot paying more than the next guy.
Yeah, it's sort of, you make some really interesting points, and I think it's really, it's always a journey. No job in a startup is ever done. It's sort of, I equate it to, I've got a list of things on my task list here, and I go, right, I've done this for today. Inevitably, that task is going to come back in a week, 2 weeks time, for me to review what we did and how it fared, whether it be sort of results on messaging or feedback or whatever. But ultimately, it's still I've got to now go back through it and refine it, because you're talking, as you said, you're talking to, from a lead gen perspective, we target 4 main sort of personas inside of firms. It's everyone's got the same message, but the flavors are subtly different.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's subtle, and it's sort of really bit of a not. It's not a challenge. It's just about scale. For startups, it's about scale. How can we do things most as effectively as possible, as cheaply as possible, and get the best results, and not feel like you're treading water doing 1,000 things every day. Automation, exactly. So how can you start to look at that? Yeah. It's interesting. I think what I didn't know about you, Cheryl, during your intro, you said that you came from sort of a marketing background. Sort of when I was at HiQ back in the day, I looked after a product called Publisher, which had a marketing feel to it, and I often sort of started to think about, okay, well, the things and the features that I'm building as part of this tool set, how. And I never really thought about it, but I was thinking about, I sort of now in a situation where I'm working in a startup scale up kind of organization. And I'm thinking, if I had a product like this, I could do this. And I'm starting to think through sort of my backstory and how it influences how I think, what I do, what I go to. Your marketing sort of background, how does that drive sort of some of the sort of business decisions you make in terms of, you want to go out and sort of connect with people and build up that brand and all of those sorts of things, but how are you influenced, if that makes sense, from the types of things that you're interested in versus your background?
I mean, I think I think it all kind of ties together, because I, like, way back when, I thought I was going to be a journalist. That's what I originally went to school for, and it turns out about halfway through I realized that was going to make me very poor. And so I said, you know what, I got to go in a different direction. And so I went into communications and marketing, and that's kind of how I ended up over there. But I think it's a really fun thing to do, to try to crack that puzzle of talking to people and getting the message, right? Because there's 2 parts of communication. There's encoding the message, sending it out, and there's decoding what the recipient gets out of it, right? And there's so many variations that are successful. I think that's the thing I really dig about marketing, about writing content and journalism and things like that, or maybe not modern journalism, but back in the day, in the old days, maybe. But it really does influence, to your point, the things I love working on now. And it's one of the reasons I like working with early stage startups, right? It's just a huge open white piece of paper to work on, right?
Yeah.
And we have ideas and we have hypotheses, and now we can go out and test them and chase them down and see which ones are right.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is interesting how it all comes back full circle sometimes. And I think if you can find a job that it's got a baseline in the stuff that you love doing, as opposed to the thing that you think is going to make you rich, and the thing that's going to do this, and the thing that's going to pay you the most for the least amount of work, all those sorts of things. But if you love doing it, you don't mind throwing in some extra hours or doing stuff, especially when you're working for yourself in that scenario. I think from a startup perspective, I was chatting to a friend yesterday, and they, interestingly, they've doing well. They've won a ton of business, and they're sort of moving in all the right directions. What they're struggling with is trying to work out how to scale and drive adoption. So they've won a piece of business. They're in a particular practice area, or they've solved a particular problem, and I think that's from my perspective probably the second most challenging thing about running a tech business, particularly in this market, in this industry, is the driving adoption between practice areas, between different divisions, operationally, whatever it might be. How are your sort of the people that you've worked with over the last couple of years? Are they at that stage yet where they're needing to think about how they scale adoption, what that looks like, and everything else?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and when I was inside the law firms, a lot of times I had ownership for adoption of the things we bought, right?
Yeah.
So that was part of my gig as well. So kind of have the experience inside and outside. And definitely some of the companies that I'm working with have found that traction and are starting to get those sales, but are saying, well, I'm kind of freaked out because only like 6 people are logging in on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, right? How do we get to that next level?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I always tell people is it goes back to always thirsty horses with me. It goes back to thirsty horses, right? We all have the thing that we think our product is best for, right? We're like, no, it's great for this. But if you can find a practice group or a pocket of humans that like think one of your use cases is super sexy, start with those people and put all your energy into those people.
Yeah.
And like make them shouting fans of your company and your product, right? Because they have fringe people around them and those people have fringe people, right? So you're really using a network effect inside a firm to try to get that done. But it can be hard to do because there can be gatekeepers, right? There's the people who are like, no, don't talk to my lawyers. And I always say, just have someone else lower rank than you call them. And then be like, sorry, I didn't tell Cheryl she wasn't supposed to do that. My bad, right? Like, sometimes you can be a little tricky. Like, I understand why they don't want it because I've been on that side of the line. But at the same time, they're busy too, right? The innovation people or the knowledge people that you're working with who are helping you support, and they want your product to be adopted. You spend money. They spend money on it. They want to use it, right? But they're busy too. So, if there's any of those folks listening, please stop being gatekeepers. Play along.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think there's always I think I commented on a LinkedIn post earlier on this week about innovation and how innovation teams are becoming more BAU by the day. Because innovation has matured, we've got processes and structure now. We have to get sign-offs. We have to do these things, and of course you do. And as when you've bought something, you've moved it out of the innovation sphere, and you're now working towards a business as usual, which means that the innovation team shouldn't really own it as such. It should now be a different team internally, but different law firms are set up in different ways. But I think it's that interesting sort of dynamic, having worked inside of a law firm buying technology for 10, 11 years throughout various stages of those years, and then working at HiQ and then working here, or Autologics, you start to look at, okay, well, there is two sides. You've got your product owners, or what's now matured into, particularly here in the UK market, product owners inside of a law firm who are responsible for understanding the product, enabling and educating internally what the product does and how it does, and sort of driving that adoption. But then the fear and worry that actually it's going to be too successful and it's going to cost more money. And you sort of sat there going, okay, well, we're paying a license, but actually we want to drive adoption. We want to see value, but we don't want to see too much value, because if we see too much value, then more people are going to use it. And so that sort of dynamic that's why the gatekeepers exist. I think the gatekeepers exist to sort of perform that sort of back to the horses. They want to hold the horses back a little bit because they worry about, actually, we're getting too much value from this, but we don't see it as value because we see user seats, we see price per usage, price per transaction. It's like, okay, we've signed up to 50 transactions and we've blown through that in 4 months. Fantastic. That's a great thing to do. But no, it's a worry, because now what's the rest of the year going to cost us? How much is that? And it's like, it's like one of those things, but if you're using it, then you're getting value. And if you're getting value, then it's worth it, even if it costs a little bit more. So yeah, it's that dynamic is always very real.
And too, the whole Gen AI thing is going to make that even more weird and painful, I think, for law firms, right? Because I think, I'm working with several clients right now, startups that are trying to figure out, how are we going to price this, right? Like there's some that are saying we're going to get rid of user fees altogether, and it's just going to be usage because they're paying for the AI. So you're just basically paying for the AI.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going to work out or not. And then when you think about user fees and then stacking it on the unpredictability of what those tokens and everything are going to cost down the road, I mean, it is a major nightmare scenario that is going to take probably 4 or 5 years to settle out.
Yeah, 100%. And I think if you read between the lines, if you take away what you think it might be worth, the actual costs of it all are going to go down. It is a race to the bottom for token prices and all that sort of stuff. It's going to be one of those things that, oh yeah, you can do this for whatever, and it's almost going to be like buying Amazon credits in terms of how cheap it's going to be. And I think that's going to be really interesting, because those vendors that are just relying on the mainstay big LLMs out there, that is just literally a pass-through cost with a different front end on it, they're the ones that are going to be they're going to really struggle, I think, to be honest with you, in 3 or 4 years' time. I mean, at the moment they're not, but that's the transition. And then I think this whole, outside of legal, otherwise, everywhere, it's going to be a massive, massive headache in terms of who does what, how it is, who buys what, how can they buy it. I mean, you look at all the news at the moment, is sort of, and the models and the different things. It's so much. And I think, just to add, and I don't know what you think about this, just even in the legal tech industry, everyone is running at such a fast pace that there isn't time to think about what was successful or what wasn't, or what happened or what didn't, because something else has happened. So they have to be doing that too. And I think that's really dangerous. And I don't know, with the firms that you talk to, how much sort of retrospective do you think there's going on? Is there much?
I mean, no, I don't think so. No, I think you're dead on the head with that one. I think, when I think about the firms that I'm talking to about AI, I like to encourage them to, like, yes, you need the retrospective, but plan better, right?
Yeah.
Like, really think about what are the requirements for what you're trying to accomplish. That is, having worked in law firms for a long time, that was something I implemented towards the end when we finally got to more processy stuff for innovation, as you were kind of alluding to. But at the beginning, it was just like, I don't know, that one, right? Like, it was sort of just random selection. And I think we're almost back to that with these AI products, without knocking any of them. There's some that are really just open AI wrappers, and they're flying off the shelf like gangbusters.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what happens when OpenAI changes its pricing model? What happens when they come into your space with new features? I would be scared as hell to be buying some of these tools.
Yeah. It is very interesting, isn't it? And I think I was chatting to somebody else on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about how difficult it is to be a buyer of legal tech at the moment. And for firms, it's sort of, you understand keeping the lights on kind of technology, your DMSs, your PMSs, all that sort of stuff. That's evolving and getting more challenging as it becomes more complex and more feature rich and everything else. Everything else. There is a flavor for something, and there are 25 different flavors in each sub flavor. You know what I mean? There's so many different vendors doing so many different things, which is a great time to be in tech. But as a buyer, it must be really hard, really, really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a nightmare scenario, right? Even with some of the law firms I'm working with, I'm working with one right now, and I'm just trying to select a practice management system.
Yeah.
Do you know how many of those exist right now that are all perfectly viable, probably great products? It's bonkers. How do you choose? And so that's a lot of times why folks reach out to me at the mid-sized firms, especially, is just, how do we make the universe smaller, right? To the things that we need to do. Because there's not an easy way to do it. There's reference things, there's LegalTechHub, there's Gartner, there's LawNext, there's things like that, right? But you still have to kind of analyze that information in your own head and really bring that down to something tolerable, because you can't look at 100 solutions.
No, and I think that's the interesting challenge, and maybe that's one flavor of challenge, because you're in that scenario, you're buying a well understood piece of tech. It's like, everyone knows what a PMS is. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's got 5 main components. You can have different flavors, but it's all basically the same. It's not basically the same. I'm not disparaging any one particular. It's just they're all trying to achieve the same sort of outcome. But with all of the different tools that are out there from an AI perspective, everyone says AI like it's the same thing, whether you're talking about Zuva, Cynthia, AI, Co-Counsel, or whatever. But it's not. Obviously, there's different flavors, and they all sort of mean different things. But sort of AI is this broad bucket term that just sort of creates this gray area of feature. Nobody really, is that this type of AI? Is that this type of AI? Is what? And I mean, I get confused. I'm a simple human to be honest with you. So I need clarity. I need clarity through everything. But it is really tricky. It is really tricky. Talking about tricky things, you said something earlier when we were talking about operational stuff, and you were talking about collaboration. And I think, obviously, I spent 10 years at HiQ, where collaboration was a key part of what we did and how we did it. And we often talked about sort of the evolution of collaboration being not so much about the facets of law, i.e. documents and the outputs, but thinking about how you bring in sort of expertise. And back in sort of 5-6 years ago, we were talking about, okay, well, how do you bring sort of the right kind of expertise, not just from a legal standpoint? So you're bringing in the right tech people, the right marketing people. And we sort of often talked about law as a team sport. And thinking about, okay, well, you've got different people. In basketball, you've got the big tall one at the front that's scoring. You've got the big tall one at the back that's defending. You've got the agile ones in the middle. But they're all different flavors. They all like come together and sort of solve, but they form a really robust team. And I think that whole collaboration aspect, bringing different, particularly for the benefit of clients, is really improved, really sort of grown as a thing. What do you see? And I see it from a UK market. I don't necessarily see it from the US. Maybe that's because I'm just not there often enough. But what's happening in the US? What are the trends around that in terms of the types of teams that are getting built? What are they looking at? How are they approaching the client work that they're doing? Do you see much of that?
Yeah, I think it's finally happening. And we've always wanted that to happen, right? But I think it is finally happening. And I actually think we kind of have Gen AI to thank for it, as much as we might not want to. Because I think the place where I'm seeing it the most is around kind of the idea of AI governance and AI guidelines, and just kind of like, what the heck do we do with it with Gen AI? And what they're doing finally is bringing, like, well, there's the lawyer who might be working on the case, there's the privacy professional, there's the security professional, there's the innovation, there's the change management. We're finally getting those teams together.
Okay.
And it started a little bit before the pandemic. In my last firm, we were getting on client calls more to consult with them on, not just what we could offer them in terms of technology, but we could offer them in terms of guidance and advice, right? So that was starting to happen. But it's still fairly a new concept, I would say, in the US. And it's mostly the bigger firms that have a lot of, have those staff and have all the kind of right people to fill that team out, are taking the most advantage of it. And I think they're going to make some big gains as a result of that.
Yeah, I think you always, it's one of those things that tech is increasingly becoming, and has become, a bit of a commodity, but actually the right people in charge of the keyboards are going to be the most valuable thing in any business. You know what I mean? The people are the experts. The people are sort of the face as such. What are the, I mean, I sort of talked around a couple of roles like marketing, BD, IT, technology, and you sort of talked about that. One of the things that we've seen here in the UK, and I presume it's reflected in the US, but maybe just with the bigger firms, sort of the least focus, maybe again because of Gen AI, on data and data science, understanding what it means to have all of this information, whether it be structured or unstructured. How have you seen the rise of the sort of the world of data within US law firms?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, finally, right? Like, finally we got to that point. And I remember maybe it was 2018, 2019, Meredith over at Sherman Sterling was kind of the first person who was like starting to be like, big data, we need to start organizing this and coming up with structures and taxonomies and things like that. And I remember being so jealous because my firm wasn't quite there yet. Thinking like, oh, data's where the money is. Like, that's where the value is. And it's not, I think sometimes law firms had strayed away from data and kind of the idea of data analytics and really digging into what they had, because they were worried about privacy or risk or things like that, or what they might do with it. Would they, are we going to sell it? Like, why do we want this data, or why is it valuable to us? But I think people are finally figuring out that within that big bucket of data are insights. They're things that we couldn't possibly know unless we looked at all that data together. The one that was cracking me up, my friend Kalina posted the other day, they're using AI now to review the sounds that whales make to try to figure out like how they're and what they're communicating. And that's information we've had that data. We've been recording this for a long time, but we had no way to kind of synthesize it and analyze it. And now with AI, we can look at these big buckets of data. But you got to have it. You got to have it organized, right?
Yeah, and I think that's always been the thing. Is sort of hat tip to Meredith, by the way, good friend,
Right.
pioneer, good friend.
Yeah, pioneer, definitely.
But it's I think in the hands of the wrong vision, data can also be really challenging. So it's about having a strategic view of what you want to do with your data is probably as important as what I think most firms might be doing now, which is going, it's really important. We must be protecting it and organizing it and doing something. But what do we need to do with it? Can we drive more revenue from it, drive more business? Can we be more efficient? Can we create playbooks and structure and automation and all that sort of stuff? And I think that's it's really interesting to see how there are quite a lot of firms that are coming at it from a very practical standpoint before then determining what the strategy should be. And maybe that's because they don't know what data they've got, as in at the detailed level. They do know what they've got, but it's like we've got 17,000 contracts of this type, and it leads us to presume that this is so. You can start to build out that kind of world. How do you see that evolution of data strategy being fed into actual fundamental strategies around the firm, as in like what the firm is doing, why it's doing that practice area isn't performing, let's bin it because it's not performing. You know what I mean? It's like, do you see data now driving those kind of level of insights, and are we 10 years off from that, 5 years off from that? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we're still a little ways off, maybe 5. I mean, I hope it's 5. I hope it's not 10, because I think you're right. Like, we haven't figured out what we're going to do with it, right? In a lot of cases, like there's things we can do inside the firm to decide where there's inefficiencies or operational weaknesses. There's things we can do with the clients to look at their data. Like, think about discovery data, because that's something I deal with. I've dealt with a lot of my career. If you have a big corporation's discovery data, you know basically everything about them on the whole face of the earth, right? Yeah. Like, what if you could synthesize that and tell them, here are some risks that you have coming that you're not thinking about right now, right? And so I think there's all sorts of things like that. But we have to have creative people, and they kind of have to be legal professionals because of the way they're set up in the US, at least, because non-legal people can't do much. And when I say legal professionals, I'm saying lawyers. I don't know what we're saying, what the correct terminology is anymore. But we have to get creative about creating these new revenue lines, about coming up with new things we can do. Because if we just keep doing the old stuff, like, there's no point even in looking at the data, right? We're just going to do it the same old way. So
yeah, and then I think you're very right, and I think the way that for the last 10 years, the threat of the big four coming in and eating Big Lord's lunch type thing, it's like that hasn't quite happened. But you start looking at sort of what are the markers and what's driving those types of organizations. It is data, it is insights, it's proper strategy, it's ruthless, it's like, right, we're going to go after this and we're going to do it. And I think, there is a risk for law firms, those that aren't sort of getting themselves into sort of a strategic view of what their data might do for them and how it might influence what might be happening. And in that sense, when you start thinking about data and strategy and sort of, as we were saying, bringing the right people together, and it's great that, as you said, to sort of, it's starting to happen now in the US. It's happened. It happens quite a lot in the firms that I sort of chat to, but I don't have a wide spread of sort of examples, if that makes sense. But I think it's sort of, you've got to rely on people that know their shit, really, in that sense. Right. You can't just rely on the lawyers to know everything. You have to rely on the business professionals, the data people, the marketing people. I think that was the first time when my sort of trigger point for understanding the drivers for not the drivers, but actually seeing clients value the experience and expertise of technologists and marketing people during pitches and that sort of stuff when I was working for CMS. Now, this was a long time ago. This was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years ago, towards the tail end. But they were using technology, and they had humans from non-lawyer humans going to pitches alongside the partners and the associates. And I think that for me was a real sort of marker in terms of what the potential was, because I saw the value that clients got from it. And you start to then realize, okay, well, let's amplify that across everyone in this practice area or all practice areas. And you start to see sort of the stuff that can come together. And I think, yeah, it's great to see that sort of evolve. But enough about that sort of stuff. Let's talk about two things that I like talking about a lot. First of all, events. It feels like I'm like you in the sense that I like going to events, but I like talking to people at events as opposed to going and listening to people talk, if that makes sense. So what events are you going to? Are you going on an American roadshow? Are you going to every event that has ever been advertised? What are you up to?
Boy, I wish I sure could. If I had the budget, I would be. Because, yeah, I think, like you said, I get some of the greatest value out of meeting and talking to the humans out there about whatever's on their mind, right? Not even what I want to talk about. Like, what are you worried about? Whether you're a startup or investor or a law firm or a corporate legal team, like, what are you concerned about? And we can't get that from behind the computer, I'm sorry to say. Like, I just don't believe that's possible.
Agree.
And so, like you said, you and I perhaps are a little longer in the tooth than some of the other folks. So the educational sessions are maybe not as valuable to us, right? They might be not quite where we need to be. But event-wise, I'm going to hit up, so I'll be at going to Legal Geek North America, which is in, a week or so. Crush Contacts Academy, which is at Deloitte in Chicago the next day. Definitely ILTACon. I'll be at TLTF Summit down in Florida in December. And then who knows? I mean, sometimes I just decide the day before. I did say I'm trying to get into Legal Geek London in the fall. So hope to make it over to see all my London friends.
That would be awesome. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, it's like one of those things. I sort of Legal Week, Legal Geek, Filter. I used to love going to LMA back in the day. Went a few times. That was it was just a good crowd. You know what I mean? It's like it wasn't. Right. Is the marketing BD crowd's always a good crowd. But yeah, no, I think you should make it over to Legal Geek in October. Always one of my good conferences, because it's short and it's really zippy, but it's really big and busy. And I think but I think, I don't know about you, and as you said, you can't go to everything, but it feels like there's something every week.
Oh,
feels
for sure.
Like there's just so many. And maybe actually this is a good question. So with the startups that you talk to, and I know lots of conferences have got startup alleys, but they still cost money and they sort of distract you. How do you advise the startups that you work with around which conferences to go to? Which ones should you just sit in the lobby of? Which ones should you do? I mean, not that you should do that, because that's not what you should do.
I was like, you're going to get us banned, Ben.
Yeah, I know. I don't do it. I'm just sort of, I know there are people that do it.
Right.
But yeah, so I don't know how do you support and advise your startups in that sense? Because there is so many events, and you can choose a good event and a bad event really easily. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the hardest thing, right? I think you have to really know that your buyer is at that place, right? Yeah. And not just like 3 of them. You need like 1,000 of them or 500 of them. You need a lot of them for scale, right? Especially if you're small. But I think, there's a lot of hidden costs in working a booth and having a booth at one of these events too, right? And it's one of the things that I keep trying to get ILTA to work on. And Legal Week as well, because I think you think about the cost of the booth. That's one thing, right? And then you're probably going to print some materials. You're going to, need to do a backdrop and a design and everything. But you're also probably going to bring out at least 2 people. And if let's say it's Legal Week, you're going to be in New York for 4 days. That's probably several $1,000s, right? You're going to have to fly those 2 people out, depending on where you're at. that could be another couple $1,000s. And then you're going to need to eat and probably entertain and do some other stuff, which, so you're $10,000 or $20,000 in as a company that maybe has no revenue or very small revenues. That doesn't make
Exactly.
sense, right?
Yeah.
It's too crazy.
Yeah. It's, and
So
I
I
think
think,
that,
yeah,
yeah, it's just really tricky. It's just really tricky.
right.
I mean, we don't have a massive marketing budget for conferences where we are because we're small, basically. But you sort of I get pitched a new event or a new thing that sounds good
Right.
every week, and it's like unless you're getting the sort of the type of advice that you've just given in terms of or sort of understanding, okay, well, where are your buyers, what are they doing, are they going to be there or not, are you in the
Right.
right geographic location? I think that's always just really tricky. I think there's also one of those sort of classics when you've done something like ILTA a couple of years on the bounce, and then you go, actually, we didn't get anything from it last year. It didn't work out. But I can't not go now because the people that are my clients and the people that are on my pipeline that I might see and might progress stuff, um, they'll wonder why I'm not there. And that'll
Right.
be almost a negative thing, sort of, oh, they're not there. Okay, why, what, who, why? I think that's tricky for us at the moment because we want to go to the things that we went to last year, but we're having to chop and change and pick and choose based on what's worked, what hasn't worked. But there is that fear factor of actually, if we don't go, what's that gonna say? And I think that's a nice problem to have, but it's just it feels like unnecessary. But I don't know. I don't know if anyone that you speak to has that. Maybe it's just my paranoia.
No, well, I think that's absolutely true. And I've known several startups that have maybe done something very splashy and then not gone to the next show or the next show. And it's like, oh, well, they must be acquired or out of business, or you know
Mm.
what I mean? Like I've introduced investors to people, and at the next show they say, oh, they're not here. Did they get acquired, or are they out of business? Or
Yeah.
and so that's a real perception. And so I tell people, start small. I know you want to go big and buy the big booth and do the crazy thing. If you're not going to have the money to keep doing that, don't do that first.
Yeah, exactly.
Climb the mountain slowly, right?
Makes sense. Makes sense. I like that advice. My second thing that I think we both like is I love your LinkedIn posts about Music Mondays
Yes.
because
I love
music's good.
right. It's like one of those universal human things, right? And I mean, listen to my voice. I've loved music my whole life. No singing here, right? I mean, maybe in the car with the music up. This is not a singing voice, so I have to enjoy other people's work. But yeah, I mean, I've ever since I was a kid, I've loved like kind of all genres of music. Maybe not pop country. Let's exclude that. But lots of genres of music, let's say. And I find it really inspirational, and that's kind of how I use Music Monday. I kind of I'm like Garfield. Like, I kind of hate Mondays. I don't care how many days off I had before, I still hate Mondays. And so I kind of use that Music Monday post as a way to kind of get myself thinking about positive things, listen to some music I like. Maybe over the weekend, even I'm like, ooh, I heard that song again. Like, this will be a good one. So yeah, I just think it's a super fun way to connect with people. I get to learn what other people like. You listen to Helmet, obviously. So I think it's just fun. It's a fun way to connect, right? And get to know people.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that sort of, as you said, it's sort of universal. It just ties people together. So, and you just create great memories off the back of it. And sort of, there's sort of just moments where I know where I was when Jeff Buckley died. I know where I listened to a song and it has a direct association to my halls of residence at university. Things like that just sort of tie through. But I saw music for me this month. So I've got a busy month. I've not gone to a gig in a long time, but I took my two boys, 16 and 14, to a drill gig in London. So yeah, it was an act that I'd never heard of. Some 17, 18-year-old rapper that was doing a gig. I was the cool dad at the back tapping his toes. He wasn't. I was the very uncool dad at the back. Um, this weekend I went to see Smashing Pumpkins and Weezer.
Oh, Weezer's
And
so good, aren't they? I've seen
yeah,
Weezer
Weezer were
live so
great.
many time.
They
They are amazingly good.
yeah, they covered Celebrity Skin by Hole.
Ah,
That was cool. Then I've got Royal Blood in a week today. Royal Blood a week today, and then in 10 days it's the start of the Isle of Wight festival. So I'm at a
oh
festival
yeah.
for 4 days. I live on the Isle of Wight, so it's literally a stone's throw from my house. So it would be rude not to go. But yeah, June is always a good month for me. So
Yeah.
I might take a leaf off your book and start posting Music Mondays. I think
Yes,
so.
do it. I really hope that more people would jump in. They haven't quite yet, but we'll
Yeah,
get there, Ben.
I think, well, that's the thing. LinkedIn's for work stuff. It's not for social stuff, Cheryl. It's for work stuff. You should be talking about AI and automation, and there should be no personal things. That stuff's for Facebook if you're old and not cool. But
Well, think about it though, and this really gets back to even the startups, right? People work with me because they like what I'm putting out into the world, right? Like they can tell from the music I listen to, so even though it doesn't sound sometimes businessy, and I try to type Music Monday into business or life in
yeah,
general, but in the end, it's all about humans, right? We buy from humans, we sell to humans, we connect with humans. And so, I mean, maybe don't post like, the super Facebooky things, but I think it's completely legit nowadays to share kind of some personal elements
yeah.
out in the business world. And I think it's been a great driver for me business wise.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. I think, again, Meredith, we were having a discussion at NILTA 8 years ago or something like that, and we were just talking about sort of legal tech buying processes, and she said, I only want to buy from people. Humans buy from humans. They don't buy the brand. They buy from people that they get on with, and they it's sort of that whole human aspect to business is vital. You stay at businesses because you enjoy your colleagues and you work with your colleagues and everything else. You work with vendors or clients because you like them, and you go through those processes. Yes, there are it's about making money, but ultimately much more you're happier if you're working with people that you get on with and you can identify with, and you understand that there is a little layer below the work bit, which is human, family, whatever, and there's you tie it all together, and that's again it's all about the connections and talking to people. The other great thing, and I didn't even know that this was happening. Last summer or the summer before, I can't remember. Last summer, Pearl Jam were playing in London, and I saw that a good friend of mine, Glenn LaForce, who worked with Meredith, is
Mm-hmm.
now at Holland Knight, and he's posted a picture on Instagram of him at Hyde Park on the Friday night, and I said, I'm going there tomorrow. And he went, I'm going there tomorrow too. And literally, I didn't even know he was in the country properly. And so, a random work acquaintance, we ended up spending 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon watching Pearl Jam. It was awesome. Just random. But yeah, it's what
I
drives those connections.
isn't it better than that? I mean, really.
I got into trouble. We were having it was like January or something like that, and we were talking to my 11-year-old daughter, or then 10-year-old. We were talking about, okay, what was the best experience you had last year? And it was like family thing, blah blah blah. And I went Pearl Jam concert at Hyde Park, and my wife looked at me as if I'd just murdered one of my kids, because it was like everyone was saying things about the family and everything else. So I went, Pearl Jam concert, and she was like, I can't believe you. But anyway, that's what happened. That's what happened. It got me into trouble.
Oh,
Cheryl, I'm going to have to run because we're almost up at the hour. This has flown by. Thank you so much for your time, your insights, your candor. It's awesome. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciated.
you again.
And I will see you at the next event. Probably, I'm not going to make it to Chicago, but I'll see you at ILTA, definitely.
Delta, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Rock and roll. Perfect. See you later.
Thanks.
See you later. Bye.